I sat in the chemo ward, the Ford dripping its cold poison into my veins, and tried to focus on the hum of the machine instead of the ache in my bones. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and despair, a sterile prison where hope went to wither. My son, Ethan, sat across from me, his hands fidgeting, eyes darting to the floor. He hadn't looked at me directly in weeks. Not since I'd caught that flicker of something dark in his expression. Something that wasn't just grief for his dying mother. I'd raised him alone, poured every ounce of my soul into giving him a life better than the one I'd clawed out of poverty. But now, at 48, with cancer eating me alive, I saw a stranger in his face. He was 25, broad-shouldered, with my hazel eyes, but his father's sharp jaw that clenched now as he leaned forward. His voice low, like he was confessing a sin. "Mom, I need to tell you something," he said, and the words hit like a stone in my gut. I braced myself, expecting another plea for money, another excuse for why he couldn't hold a job. Instead, he said, "I sold the house. And the cars. Everything." His voice cracked, but there was no shame in it. Only a strange defiance, like he was daring me to break. I stared at him, the chemo fog clouding my thoughts. And then I laughed. A sharp, brittle sound that made the nurse glance over. Ethan's face twisted, confusion replacing his bravado. "What's so funny?" he demanded. I leaned back, the Ford tugging at my arm, and grinned through the nausea. "You think you sold it all? Sweetheart, I already did." His mouth fell open, but I wasn't done. "I sold the house last month. The cars, too. Every last thing we owned. You've got nothing left to take." The truth hung between us, heavy and sharp, and for the first time in years, I felt lighter than the disease trying to kill me. The story wasn't supposed to end like this. When I was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer 6 months ago, I thought the worst betrayal would be my own body. I'd fought for everything: our little house in the suburbs, the beat-up sedan I'd driven to night shifts, the vintage Mustang I'd restored with Ethan when he was a teenager, dreaming of the day he'd drive it. Those were the relics of our life. The proof I'd given him stability after his father walked out when he was 5. But Ethan had changed. The boy who'd once clung to me during thunderstorms had grown into a man I barely recognized. His loyalty eroded by resentment, by secrets I didn't yet understand. I'd noticed the signs: late night phone calls, sudden trips he wouldn't explain, the way he'd stopped asking how I was feeling. I thought it was grief, or maybe anger at the unfairness of it all. But it wasn't. It was greed. And I'd seen it coming. A month before that hospital confession, I'd sat in my lawyer's office, signing papers with trembling hands. The chemo had already started, each session leaving me weaker. But my mind was sharp. I'd overheard Ethan on the phone one night, his voice hushed but clear through the thin walls of our house. "Once she's gone, it's all mine," he'd said. "The house, the cars, everything. I've got a buyer lined up." My heart had cracked, not from the cancer, but from the realization that my son, my only family, was plotting to profit from my death. I didn't confront him. I didn't have the strength for that fight. Instead, I acted. I sold the house to a young couple starting their life, the cars to a collector who'd been eyeing the Mustang for years. The money went into a trust, not for Ethan, but for a cause I'd chosen in secret. I wanted him to feel the weight of his betrayal, to face the emptiness of his schemes. But I also wanted him to have a chance to change, to find the boy I'd raised beneath the man he'd become. In the hospital, Ethan's face went pale, his hands gripping the arms of the chair. "What do you mean? You sold it?" He stammered. "You couldn't have. I had power of attorney. I handled everything." I raised an eyebrow, the effort costing me more than I'd admit. "You forged that power of attorney, didn't you?" I said softly. His silence was answer enough. I'd suspected as much when I'd found the documents in his room. The signatures too perfect, too unlike my shaky scrawl. I'd hired a private investigator, a gruff man named Carl who'd confirmed Ethan's dealings with a shady real estate broker. My son had planned to sell everything the moment I was too weak to fight back, pocketing the money while I wasted away. But I wasn't just a sick woman waiting to die. I was a mother, and mothers don't give up. "You thought you could steal from me," I said, my voice steady despite the pain. "But I've been one step ahead. The money's gone, Ethan. It's safe, where you can't touch it." His eyes widened, a mix of panic and rage. "You can't do this," he hissed. "I did it for us. For you. You're dying. Mom. You don't need the house. I was going to take care of you." The lie was so blatant it almost made me laugh again. Instead, I leaned forward, ignoring the tug of the four. "You did it for yourself," I said. "But it's not too late. You can still make this right." He stared at me, his jaw tight. And for a moment, I saw a flicker of the boy he used to be scared, lost, needing me. But then he stood, his chair scraping the floor, and walked out without a word. The nurse watched him go, then turned to me with pity in her eyes. I didn't want pity. I wanted justice. That night, alone in my hospital bed, I replayed every moment of our life together. The summers we'd spent fixing up the Mustang, grease on our hands, laughing over the radio's static. The nights I'd stayed up, worrying when he didn't come home, only to find him asleep on the couch. Still my little boy. Where had I gone wrong? Had I loved him too much? Shielded him from too many consequences? Or had I not loved him enough, leaving him to carry the weight of his father's absence? I didn't have answers. Only the ache of a mother who'd lost her son long before the cancer came. But I wasn't done fighting. Not for my life, which the doctors said was measured in months, but for Ethan's soul. I'd set a trap, not just to protect what was mine, but to force him to face himself. To choose between the man he was becoming and the man I knew he could be. The next morning, Carl called. "He's on the move," he said. "Met with that broker again. Looks like he's trying to figure out what you did with the money." I nodded, though Carl couldn't see me. "Keep watching him," I said, "and send me everything you find." I hung up and stared at the ceiling, the chemo bag empty beside me. Ethan thought he'd outsmarted me, but he didn't know the half of it. I'd left him a trail, breadcrumbs leading to the truth, not just about the money, but about what family meant, what loyalty cost. If he followed it, he might find redemption. If he didn't, he'd lose more than he could imagine. The game was on, and I was playing for keeps. The hospital became my war room, a place where I waged battles not just against the cancer, but against the fracture in my family. Each drip of the four was a reminder of time slipping away, but also of the resolve hardening in my chest. Ethan hadn't returned since his confession, and the silence between us grew heavier than the disease. I'd known he was struggling. His job at the auto shop had fallen through. His friends had dwindled to a few shady characters who lingered too long in our driveway, but I hadn't realized how far he'd fallen until Carl's reports started coming in. My son was in deep with people who didn't just bend the law. They broke it without blinking. The broker, a slick man named Victor with a smile like a snake's, had promised Ethan a fortune for our house and cars. No questions asked. Ethan hadn't just betrayed me. He'd sold his soul to men who'd chew him up and spit him out. I lay back in the hospital bed, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and thought about the boy he'd been. At 10, he'd helped me plant roses in the front yard, his small hands caked with dirt, his laughter brighter than the sun. At 16, he'd stood up to a bully at school, not with fists, but with words, protecting a younger kid who reminded me of him. Where was that Ethan now? Buried under resentment, under the weight of a world that had promised him everything and given him nothing. I tried to shield him from that world, working double shifts at the diner, saving every penny for his college fund. But he dropped out after a year, chasing get-rich-quick schemes, chasing a life I couldn't give him. Maybe that was my mistake, not letting him fail sooner, not letting him learn that love, not money, was what held us together. Carl's next report came by email. A grainy photo attached. Ethan, standing outside a rundown bar, shaking hands with Victor. The broker's smile was all teeth, and Ethan's shoulders were slumped, like a man who knew he was in over his head. I zoomed in on the photo, searching my son's face for a sign of regret. But all I saw was determination. He wasn't giving up on his plan. Not yet. That was fine. I'd planned for that, too. The trust I'd set up wasn't just a lockbox for the money. It was a test. I'd left clues, subtle but deliberate, in the paperwork I knew Ethan would eventually find. A letter, tucked into the safe deposit box at the bank, addressed to him. It didn't just explain where the money had gone, a local shelter for women escaping abuse, a cause I'd cared about since my own mother's struggles. It laid out why. I wanted him to read it, to feel the weight of his choices, to see that redemption was still within reach if he'd only reach for it. The next day, I called my lawyer, Sarah, a woman with a no-nonsense voice and a heart softer than she'd admit. He's digging, I told her. Make sure the bank knows he might try to access the box. Sarah paused, her voice careful. Are you sure about this? Ellen, he's your son. You could just talk to him. I closed my eyes, the chemo making my head swim. I've tried talking, I said. He needs to learn this the hard way. Sarah didn't argue. She'd seen the forged documents, the proof of Ethan's betrayal. She knew this wasn't just about money, it was about saving him from himself. That evening, I stared out the hospital window, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and red. I thought about justice, about what it meant to hold someone accountable while still loving them. I didn't want Ethan to suffer. Not really. I wanted him to wake up, to see the man he was becoming and choose a different path. The trust was my last act of faith in him, a gamble that he'd find the letter, read it, and understand. But faith is a fragile thing, and mine was wearing thin. Carl's next call confirmed it. Ethan had gone to the bank, tried to charm the clerk into letting him see the safe deposit box. He'd failed, but he wasn't giving up. He's desperate, Carl said. Victor's leaning on him hard. Says the buyers are getting impatient. I gripped the phone, my knuckles white. Let him dig, I said. He'll find what I left him. Days passed, each one a blur of treatments and pain. But I kept my focus on Ethan. I pictured him poring over documents, calling in favors, trying to unravel what I'd done. I imagined him finding the letter, his hands trembling as he read my words. Ethan, you thought you could take what wasn't yours. But you've taken more than that. You've taken my trust. The money's gone, given to those who need it more. But you can still make this right. Come back to me, not as the man you are, but as the man I know you can be. I didn't know if he'd read it, or if he did, whether it would change him. But I had to believe it was possible. I had to believe in the boy who'd planted roses with me, who'd laughed under the summer sun. The hospital grew quieter at night, the beeping machines a strange lullaby. I thought about my own mother, how she'd fought to keep us safe from a man who'd hurt her, how she'd taught me that family wasn't just blood, it was choice. I'd chosen Ethan every day, even when it hurt, even when he pushed me away. Now, I was choosing him one last time, not with money or a house, but with a chance to redeem himself. The chemo was slowing, the doctor's voices softer, their eyes kinder. I knew what that meant. Time was running out, but I wasn't afraid. I'd done what I could. The rest was up to Ethan. By the end of the week, Carl reported that Ethan had stopped meeting Victor. He'd been seen at the library, of all places, pulling public records, trying to trace the sale of the house. I smiled. A small, tired thing. He was following the trail. Whether it led to redemption or ruin, I couldn't control. But I'd given him the map. That was enough. The hospital room felt smaller each day, the walls closing in as my strength waned. The chemo was relentless, stripping away my energy. But my mind stayed sharp, tethered to Ethan and the game we were playing. I'd always been a planner, mapping out every step of our life, budgets stretched thin, birthdays made special with homemade cakes, college applications filled out under lamplight. Now, I was planning something bigger, a reckoning. Ethan's betrayal had cut deeper than the cancer, but it also lit a fire in me. I wasn't just fighting for my life. I was fighting for his soul, for the chance to pull him back from the edge he didn't even see. Carl's updates came like dispatches from a battlefield. Ethan had stopped chasing Victor's promises and was now obsessed with finding the money. He'd been to the bank again, this time with a lawyer of his own, a cheap one, Carl said, with a polyester suit and a nervous tick. They'd tried to contest the sale of the house, claiming I wasn't of sound mind when I signed the papers. The irony made me chuckle. A dry, painful sound. I'd been more lucid in that lawyer's office than I'd ever been. Every decision deliberate. Every signature a step in my plan. The bank had shut them down, citing my ironclad paperwork. Sarah had made sure of that. But Ethan wasn't giving up. He was digging deeper, closer to the safe deposit box, closer to the letter I'd left for him. I pictured him reading it, his hands shaking, his eyes scanning my words. I'd written it in a single night. The hospital quiet except for the hum of machines. Ethan, you've always been my reason to keep going. Even now, when you've hurt me, I believe in you. The money's gone, but not your chance to make things right. Find me. Talk to me. Be my son again. I didn't know if it would reach him, if the boy I'd raised was still there, buried under the anger and greed. But I had to try. I'd lost too much to give up on him now. The days blurred, each one marked by the rhythm of the hospital nurses changing shifts, the clatter of meal trays, the soft tread of doctors who spoke in careful tones. I kept Carl's number on speed dial, waiting for news. When it came, It wasn't what I expected. He's at the shelter, Carl said, his voice gruff but curious. The one you donated to. He's been there all morning, talking to the director. My heart stuttered. Not from the chemo, but from hope. Fragile and dangerous. The shelter was the key. The place where I'd sent the money from the house and cars. It wasn't just a charity. It was a symbol. A reminder of the life I'd fought for. The one I wanted Ethan to understand. Had he found the letter? Was he starting to see? I didn't dare hope too much. Ethan had always been stubborn. Quick to anger when things didn't go his way. I remembered the fights we'd had when he was a teenager. His voice loud enough to shake the walls. My own rising to match it. But there was love in those fights. A tether that held us together. Now, that tether was fraying. And I didn't know if it could hold. I called Sarah. My voice weaker than I wanted. If he comes to you, don't give him the letter. I said. Make him work for it. She hesitated. Then agreed. She understood what I was doing. Even if she didn't fully agree. This wasn't just about protecting the money. It was about forcing Ethan to confront himself. To choose between the easy path and the right one. That night, I dreamed of the house we'd lost. Not the one Ethan thought he'd sold, but the one we'd lived in. Filled with memories. The kitchen where I'd taught him to make pancakes. The backyard where we'd built a tree house that leaned dangerously to one side. In the dream, Ethan was small again. His hand in mine. His laughter bright. I woke with tears on my face. The hospital room cold and empty. The dream felt like a betrayal. A reminder of what we'd been and what we'd never be again. But it also steeled me. I wasn't done yet. Not with Ethan. Not with this fight. Carl's next call came at dawn. His voice tight. He's back at the bank. He's got a court order this time. Says he's your legal representative. My stomach twisted. Ethan was smarter than I'd given him credit for. Or maybe Victor was pulling strings. Either way, he was closer to the safe deposit box than I'd expected. I called Sarah immediately. Stall him, I said. Tell the bank to demand more proof. Anything to slow him down. She promised to handle it. But I heard the worry in her voice. Time was slipping away. For both of us. I spent the day staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of Ethan's life. The time he'd broken his arm falling off that treehouse. The way he'd clung to me in the ER. Scared but trusting. The night he'd come home drunk at 17. Confessing he'd crashed the sedan. His apologies spilling out between sobs. I'd forgiven him every time. Because that's what mothers do. But this was different. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. And yet, I couldn't let go of the hope that he'd choose differently. That he'd find the letter and let it change him. By evening, Sarah called back. He's got the box, she said, her voice heavy. The court order held up. He's going to find the letter. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. This was what I'd wanted, wasn't it? For Ethan to face the truth. But now that it was happening, fear gripped me. What if he read it and felt nothing? What if the boy I loved was truly gone? I closed my eyes, the chemo bag dripping beside me, and waited. The next move was his. The hospital air was thick with the scent of disinfectant. But all I could smell was the weight of anticipation. Ethan had the letter now. I imagined him sitting in some dimly lit room. Maybe the back of that rundown bar. Unfolding the paper with hands that didn't quite know what they held. Would he read it with anger? skimming for clues to the money. Or would he pause? Let my words sink in. Feel the ache of what we'd lost. I didn't know. And that uncertainty gnawed at me worse than the cancer. I'd set this in motion. Laid the trap. But traps don't guarantee redemption. Sometimes. They just catch what's already broken. Carl called that afternoon. His voice quieter than usual. He's at the shelter again, he said. Didn't talk to anyone this time. Just sat in his car, staring at the building. Looked like he was crying. My heart clenched. A sharp pain that had nothing to do with the 4 in my arm. Crying didn't mean he was sorry. It could mean he was angry, or scared, or just frustrated that his plan had fallen apart. But it was something, a crack in the wall he'd built around himself. I asked Carl to keep watching, to tell me if Ethan went back to Victor or the bank. I needed to know which path he was choosing. The hospital routine dragged on. Blood draws, scans, nurses with kind eyes who didn't ask about the son who hadn't visited. I didn't tell them about Ethan. Didn't want their pity or their judgment. This was between me and him. A private war fought with love and betrayal. I thought about the shelter. About the women it would help. Women like my mother who'd had nowhere to go when the fists started flying. I'd chosen it deliberately. Not just for them, but for Ethan. To show him what mattered. The money from the house and cars wasn't just numbers in a bank. It was a legacy. A chance to do good. I wanted him to see that. To feel it. To understand why I'd taken it out of his reach. Sarah called the next day. Her voice brisk but warm. He came to my office. She said. Asked about the trust. Didn't mention the letter. But he looked different. Not so cocky. I told him he'd need a court order to get any details. And he didn't argue. Just left. I nodded. My throat tight. Different could mean anything. Maybe he'd read the letter and felt something. Maybe he was just regrouping. Planning his next move. I asked Sarah to keep the trust locked down. To make him work for every scrap of information. If he wanted to fight me, he'd have to face the truth first. That night, I couldn't sleep. The hospital was too quiet. The machines too loud. I kept seeing Ethan's face. The way it had looked in the chemo ward when I'd laughed at his confession. Shock. Yes. But also shame. Buried deep. I'd raised him to be better than this. Hadn't I? To value family over money. Loyalty over greed. But maybe I'd failed. Maybe I'd been too busy working. Too focused on keeping us afloat. To teach him what really mattered. The guilt was a blade. Sharper than the cancer's bite. I pushed it away. Focusing on the plan. The letter was my last chance. My final plea. If it didn't reach him, nothing would. Carl's next update came at dawn. His voice rough from lack of sleep. He's back at the shelter. This time, he went inside. Talked to the director for an hour. Didn't look happy when he came out. But he wasn't angry either. Just lost. Lost was better than angry. Lost meant he was searching. Maybe for the money. Maybe for something more. I thanked Carl and hung up. My hands trembling. The shelter's director, a woman named Maria with a voice like warm honey, had been my confidant when I'd set up the trust. She knew about Ethan. About the letter. About my hope that he'd come to her not as a thief, but as a son seeking answers. If he was talking to her, it meant he was following the trail I'd left. I spent the day in a haze. The chemo making my thoughts sluggish, but not dulling my resolve. I pictured Ethan at the shelter, hearing Maria talk about the women they helped. the lives they saved. Would it stir something in him? Would he see the connection to his grandmother? To the stories I'd told him about her strength? Her survival? Or would he just see dollar signs? A fortune slipped through his fingers. I didn't know. And the not knowing was a weight I carried alongside the disease. By evening, Sarah called again. "He's asking for a meeting with you," she said. "Says he wants to talk." I told him you're not well, but he insisted. My heart leapt, then sank. A meeting could mean anything: an apology, an accusation, another lie. I told Sarah to arrange it for the next day, here in the hospital. I wanted him to see me, not just as his mother, but as the woman who'd outsmarted him, who'd loved him enough to fight for him even now. I wanted him to look into my eyes and choose. The night stretched on, endless and heavy. I thought about the letter, about the words I'd poured into it. "Ethan, I've given you everything, but I can't give you my trust if you don't earn it. The money's gone, but you're not. Come back to me." I didn't know if he'd read it, if he'd felt it. But he was coming. Tomorrow, I'd know. Tomorrow, I'd see if my son was still mine. The morning of Ethan's visit dawned gray, the hospital window framing a sky heavy with clouds. I felt the weight of it in my bones, the chemo leaving me hollow but my heart pounding with something close to hope. I'd spent the night rehearsing what I'd say, how I'd face the son who'd tried to steal from me. I wanted to be strong, to show him I wasn't broken, not by the cancer or his betrayal. But as the hours ticked by, I felt the fragility of my body, the way it betrayed me with every breath. I was running out of time, and Ethan was my last unfinished business. He arrived just after noon, his footsteps hesitant in the hallway. I heard them before I saw him, a slow shuffle that wasn't the confident stride of the boy who'd once raced through our house. When he stepped into the room, I barely recognized him. His eyes were red, his jaw unshaven, his shoulders hunched like he carried a weight heavier than mine. He held a crumpled piece of paper in his hand, a letter. I realized, my heart lurching. He'd read it. He stood by the door, not meeting my eyes. And for a moment, we were strangers, not mother and son. "Ethan," I said, my voice softer than I'd planned. He flinched, like the sound of his name was a blow. "Sit down." He hesitated, then pulled the chair closer, the scrape of its legs loud in the quiet room. He sat, still clutching the letter, his knuckles white. "You read it," I said, not a question. He nodded, his throat working like he was swallowing something bitter. "I didn't know," he said finally, his voice low, broken. "I didn't know you'd given it all away. To them." He meant the shelter, the women I'd chosen over him. I leaned back, the four tugging at my arm. "You thought you could take it," I said. "You thought I wouldn't notice." He looked up then, his eyes meeting mine, and I saw the storm in them: guilt, anger, shame, all tangled together. "I was trying to help," he said, but the words sounded hollow, even to him. "Victor said we could make enough to get you better treatment, to move you somewhere nice." I thought. He trailed off, his hands twisting the letter. I wanted to reach for him, to smooth the pain from his face like I had when he was small. But I stayed still. "You thought you could profit from my death," I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. "You thought you could lie to me, forge my name, sell what I built. For what, Ethan? A quick buck?" A pat on the back from a man like Victor. He flinched again, his face crumpling. I didn't mean for it to go this far. He said. I was scared. Mom. Scared of losing you. Scared of being nothing. His voice broke, and I saw the boy he'd been. The one who'd clung to me when his father left. Who'd cried when I worked too many hours to be there. But that boy had made choices. And those choices had led us here. You're not nothing, I said, my voice softer now. But you've been acting like it. You've been acting like the only thing that matters is money. Not family. Not trust. He looked down at the letter, his fingers tracing the words I'd written. You gave it all away, he said, almost a whisper. The house. The cars. Everything we had. I nodded. The effort costing me. I gave it to people who needed it. I said, women like your grandmother, who had nothing when she left your grandfather. I wanted it to mean something. I wanted you to see that. He was silent for a long time, the letter trembling in his hands. I went to the shelter. He said finally, talk to Maria. She told me what you did. Why you did it. She showed me the rooms. The women. The kids. I didn't know. I watched him, searching for the lie. But all I saw was pain. You could have asked. I said. You could have talked to me. Ethan. Instead, you chose Victor. You chose greed. He shook his head, tears spilling now. I didn't know what else to do. He said. I thought I was saving us. I thought. He stopped, his voice choking. I wanted to believe him. Wanted to wrap him in my arms and tell him it was okay. But it wasn't. Not yet. You hurt me, I said, the words cutting through the air. You broke my trust. And you don't get it back just because you're sorry. He looked up, his eyes raw. What do I do? Mom. How do I fix this? It was the question I'd been waiting for. The one I'd hoped for when I wrote the letter. But it wasn't enough to hear it. He had to mean it. You start by being honest, I said. With me. With yourself. You walk away from Victor. From the lies. From the schemes. You choose to be the man I raised. Not the one you've become. He nodded. Slow and heavy. Like the weight of my words was sinking in. I want to. He said. I want to try. It wasn't a promise. Not yet. But it was a start. I leaned back. Exhaustion pulling at me. But a spark of hope flickered in my chest. Then try, I said. But know this. Ethan, I am watching. And I'm not done fighting for you. He stayed for an hour. Silent mostly. Holding the letter like it was a lifeline. When he left, he didn't hug me. Didn't say goodbye. But he looked back. Just once. And I saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Not redemption. Not yet. But a question. A possibility. The days after Ethan's visit were a blur of pain and waiting. The chemo was taking more than it gave now. Each session leaving me weaker. My body a fragile shell around a stubborn heart. But my mind stayed sharp. Focused on Ethan. On the flicker of hope he'd left behind. His words, I want to try, echoed in my head. Fragile but heavy. Like a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. I didn't know if he'd walk away from Victor. If he'd choose the hard path of redemption over the easy one of greed. But I'd given him the chance. Laid the truth bare in that letter. And now it was up to him to decide who he'd be. Carl's calls became my lifeline. His gruff voice a tether to the world outside the hospital. He's laying low. He told me 2 days after Ethan's visit. No sign of Victor or the broker's crew. He's been back to the shelter, though. Didn't talk to anyone. Just sat in the parking lot again. I pictured Ethan in his beat-up car, staring at the shelter's brick facade, wrestling with whatever was churning inside him. Was it guilt? Shame? Or just frustration that his plan had crumbled? I wanted to believe it was more, that the letter had cracked something open in him. But I'd learned not to trust hope too easily. Hope could cut deeper than betrayal if it led nowhere. Sarah called next, her voice cautious but warm. He's been asking about the trust again, she said. Not fighting it this time. Just asking. Wanted to know how it works. Who it helps. I told him to talk to you, but he said he wasn't ready. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. Not ready meant he was thinking, maybe feeling the weight of what he'd done. I told Sarah to keep him at arm's length, to make him earn every answer. If he wanted to understand, he'd have to dig for it, just like he'd dug for the money. The hospital routine ground on nurses checking vitals, doctors murmuring about test results, the endless drip of the 4. I hated how small it made me feel, how it reduced my life to numbers and scans. But it also gave me time to think, to replay every moment with Ethan, to search for the turning point where I'd lost him. Was it when his father left, leaving a hole I couldn't fill? Or when I worked too many hours, leaving him to fend for himself? I'd thought I was building a future for us, but maybe I'd built a wall instead, one he couldn't climb. The guilt was a quiet ache, separate from the cancer, but just as real. I pushed it aside, focusing on the present. Ethan was out there, circling the truth, and I had to believe he'd find it. Carl's next update came late, his voice tight with urgency. He's meeting Victor tonight, he said. At that bar. I followed him, saw them talking in the alley. Didn't look friendly. My stomach twisted, the hope I'd clung to flickering like a candle in a storm. What did you hear? I asked, my voice steady despite the fear. Not much, Carl admitted. Victor was angry, waving his arms. Ethan looked scared. Maybe. Kept shaking his head. I closed my eyes, picturing my son cornered by a man who thrived on others' desperation. Victor wasn't just a broker. He was a predator. And Ethan was his prey. But he was also my son, and I wasn't done fighting for him. I called Sarah immediately, my hands shaking as I gripped the phone. If Ethan comes to you, tell him about the shelter, I said. Tell him everything why I chose it, what it means. Don't hold back. She hesitated, then agreed. I knew what she was thinking, that I was pushing too hard, risking too much. But I didn't have time for caution. The cancer was winning, and Ethan was slipping away. I needed him to see the bigger picture, to understand that the money wasn't just go night was doing good, making a difference. If he could see that, maybe he'd see himself differently, too. That night, I lay awake, the hospital's silence pressing against me. I thought about the letter, about the words I'd written to reach the boy I'd lost. Ethan, you're my heart. Even now. You've made mistakes, but they don't define you. Choose better. Choose us. I didn't know if he'd read it again, if it had sunk in, but I clung to the image of him at the shelter, sitting in his car, lost but searching. It was a thin thread, but it was all I had. The next morning, Carl called again. He's back at the shelter, he said, a note of surprise in his voice. This time, he went inside. Stayed for 2 hours. Maria said he asked about volunteering. Volunteering. The word hit me like a shockwave. A spark of hope so bright it hurt. What else? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't say much. Carl said, just listened. Maria showed him around. Introduced him to some of the women. He looked, I don't know, different. Like he was seeing something for the first time. I thanked Carl and hung up, tears burning my eyes. Volunteering didn't erase what Ethan had done, didn't undo the forged documents or the betrayal. But it was a step, a choice, a sign that the letter might have reached him. I pictured him at the shelter, hearing the stories of women who'd fought to survive, just like I had, just like his grandmother had. Maybe he was starting to understand. Maybe he was starting to see that family wasn't about what you owned, but what you gave. The day stretched on, each hour heavy with waiting. I didn't know if Ethan would come back, if he'd face me again. But I felt a shift, a crack in the wall between us. He was searching, and I'd given him the map. Now, I just had to wait and see where it led. The hospital room felt like a cage. Its walls too close. Its air too thin. Each day bled into the next. The chemo sapping what little strength I had left. But I clung to the thought of Ethan. Out there, wrestling with the truth I'd laid bare. His visit to the shelter. His questions about volunteering, these were signs. Fragile but real. That he might be turning back toward the boy I'd raised. But I'd been burned before. By his promises. His tears. His lies. Hope was a dangerous thing. And I held it at arm's length. Like a flame that could warm or destroy. Carl's updates were sporadic now. As if Ethan was moving in shadows. Harder to track. He's been at the shelter every day? Carl said one morning. His voice gruff, but curious. Not just sitting in the car. He's helping out carrying boxes. Fixing a leaky sink. Maria says he's quiet. Keeps to himself. But he's there. I close my eyes. Picturing Ethan with a wrench in his hand. The same hands that had forged my signature. Now tightening a pipe to help women he'd never met. Was it guilt driving him? Or something deeper? Something closer to redemption? I didn't dare assume. What about Victor? I asked. Carl hesitated. No sign of him. Ethan's been dodging his calls. Looks like he's trying to cut ties. My heart lifted, then sank. Cutting ties with Victor was a start, but it didn't erase the betrayal. It didn't bring my son back to me. Sarah called later that day, her voice lighter than usual. He came by again, she said. Asked about the trust, but not like before. He wanted to know how it helps the shelter, how it's structured. I told him the basics: show you set it up to fund their programs, their housing, their counseling. He listened. Ellen. Really listened. I nodded, my throat tight. Listening wasn't enough, but it was more than I'd expected. Did he mention the letter? I asked. Sarah paused. Not directly. But he asked if you'd ever talked about him. About why you chose the shelter. I told him you did it for women like your mother. He didn't say anything after that. Just thanked me and left. I lay back, the hospital bed creaking under me. Ethan was circling closer, piecing together the why of what I'd done. The shelter wasn't just a place to send the money. It was a mirror, reflecting the life we'd lived, the struggles we'd overcome. My mother had been one of those women, fleeing a man who'd broken her spirit but not her will. I told Ethan those stories, hoping they'd teach him strength, resilience, love. Had he forgotten them? Or had they just been buried under his anger, his need to prove himself in a world that didn't care? I wanted to believe he was remembering now, that the shelter was showing him what I couldn't. The next day, Carl called with news that stopped my breath. He confronted Victor. He said, "Last night, outside the bar, I was there, kept my distance." Ethan told him he was done, that he wasn't selling anything else, wasn't playing his game. Victor got loud, threatened him, but Ethan didn't back down, walked away and didn't look back. I gripped the phone, my heart racing. Ethan standing up to Victor wasn't just a gesture. It was a choice, a line drawn in the sand. But Victor wasn't the kind of man to let go easily. "Is he safe?" I asked, my voice sharp. "For now," Carl said. "I'm keeping an eye on him. But Victor's not happy. You should know that." Fear clawed at me. Not for myself, but for Ethan. I'd wanted him to face the consequences of his choices. But not like this. Not with a man like Victor who'd see defiance as a debt to be paid. I called Sarah. Told her to warn the shelter. To keep an eye out for anyone suspicious. "And if Ethan comes to you," I said, "tell him to come see me. No more games." She agreed, her voice steady but worried. I hung up and stared at the ceiling, the chemo bag dripping beside me. Ethan was fighting his own battle now, one I couldn't control. All I could do was wait, hope, and pray he'd choose the right side. That night, I dreamed of the Mustang, the car we'd restored together. Ethan at 15, his hands greasy, his smile wide as we got the engine to purr. In the dream, he was driving, the road stretching endless before us. But when I looked over, he was gone, the seat empty. I woke gasping, the hospital's sterile air choking me. The dream felt like a warning, a reminder that time was slipping away. I didn't know how long I had left, but I knew I couldn't lose him. Not completely. The next morning, Maria called from the shelter. "He's here again," she said, her voice warm but cautious. "He's been helping with the kids, reading to them. He's good with them. Ellen. Patient." I didn't expect that. I smiled, tears stinging my eyes. "What's he saying?" I asked. "Not much," she said. "But he asked about you, about how you chose us." I told him about your mother, about what the shelter meant to you. He listened, then went back to the kids. "I think he's trying to understand." Trying to understand. It wasn't enough, but it was something. I thanked Maria and hung up, my heart heavy with a mix of pride and pain. Ethan was at the shelter, not chasing money, but helping, listening, learning. Maybe the letter had reached him. Maybe he was starting to see. I closed my eyes, the chemo pulling me under, and held on to that thought. It was all I had left. The hospital had become my world, its rhythms as familiar as my own heartbeat drip of the 4. Murmur of nurses, the distant wail of an ambulance. But my thoughts were elsewhere, tethered to Ethan, to the choices he was making in the shadow of my plan. His time at the shelter, his stand against Victor, these were threads of hope. But they were fragile, easily snapped by the weight of his past mistakes. I wanted to believe he was changing, that the letter had reached the part of him I'd thought was lost. But trust was a luxury I couldn't afford. Not yet. Carl's call came early, his voice low and urgent. "Victor's not letting go," he said. "I saw him tailing Ethan last night, after he left the shelter. Didn't make a move. Just watched. Ethan didn't notice." My stomach twisted, the fear sharp and cold. Victor wasn't just a broker. He was a man who thrived on control. And Ethan's defiance was a challenge he wouldn't ignore. "Stay on him," I told Carl. "If Victor gets close, call the police. I don't care what it takes." Carl grunted his agreement, and I hung up, my hands shaking. I'd wanted Ethan to face consequences, but not like this. Not with a man who'd hurt him to prove a point. I called Maria next, my voice steadier than I felt. "Is Ethan there?" I asked. "He just left," she said. "He was helping with the food delivery today. Stayed longer than usual. Talked to some of the women. Asked about you again." My heart ached, a mix of pride and worry. "What did he say?" I asked. "Wanted to know why you gave everything to us," Maria said. "I told him about your mother, about how you wanted to give others the chance she didn't have." He didn't say much, just nodded and left. But he looked heavy, like he was carrying something big. Heavy. The word stayed with me, a reminder of the weight I'd placed on him with the letter, with the truth. I'd wanted him to feel it, to understand what he'd done. But now I wondered if I'd pushed too far. What if he broke under that weight, instead of rising to meet it? I pushed the thought away, focusing on the present. Ethan was still at the shelter, still asking questions, still searching. That meant something, even if I didn't know what. Sarah called later, her voice cautious but hopeful. "He came by again," she said. "Asked if he could see the trust documents. I showed him the public parts, nothing sensitive, just the overview. He read every word. Ellen. Asked about the shelter's programs, how the money's used. I think he's trying to understand why you did it." I nodded, my throat tight. "Did he mention me?" I asked. "Not directly," she said. "But he asked if you'd ever talked about forgiving him." I said you hadn't, but that you loved him. He didn't respond, just left. Forgiveness. The word hung in the air, heavy as the clouds outside. I didn't know if I could forgive Ethan. Not fully. Not yet. He'd hurt me in a way that went beyond the money, beyond the house and cars. He'd broken the trust that had held us together, the bond I'd thought was unbreakable. But I also knew that forgiveness wasn't just about him, it was about me. About letting go of the anger that was eating me as surely as the cancer. I wanted to see him, to hear him say he was sorry, to know he meant it. But I didn't know if he was ready, or if I was. That night, Carl called again, his voice grim. "Victor made a move," he said. "Caught Ethan outside his apartment. Roughed him up a bit. Nothing serious, but enough to scare him." I stepped in, scared Victor off. "But he's not done. Ethan's shaken, but he's okay." My heart stopped, then started again, pounding too fast. "Where is he now?" I asked. "At the shelter," Carl said. "Went straight there after. Maria's keeping an eye on him." I thanked Carl, my voice barely a whisper, and hung up. Ethan running to the shelter wasn't just a reflex. It was a choice, a sign that he saw it as safe, as something worth protecting. Or maybe he just had nowhere else to go. I lay awake, the hospital's silence pressing against me. I thought about Ethan, bruised and scared, hiding in the place I'd chosen for the money. Was he there because he felt guilty? Because he wanted to make things right? Or was he just running from Victor? From the mess he'd made? I didn't know. But I clung to the image of him at the shelter. Helping. Listening. Being the man I'd raised. It was a thin hope. But it was enough to keep me going. The next morning, Maria called. Her voice warm, but careful. He's still here, she said. Slept on a cot in the storage room last night. He's been talking to the kids, helping with their homework. He's good with them. Ellen. Really good. Tears burned my eyes. But I didn't let them fall. Does he know I know? I asked. Not yet, she said. But he asked if you'd ever come by. If you'd seen the place. I told him you had. Before you got sick. He didn't say anything. Just went back to the kids. I thanked Maria and hung up. My heart full and heavy. Ethan was finding something at the shelter. Something I'd hoped he'd see. But he was still running. Still hiding from Victor. From me. From himself. I needed him to stop running. To face me. To face the truth. I needed my son back. Before it was too late. Time was slipping through my fingers. Each day in the hospital a reminder that the cancer was winning. The chemo was a losing battle. Leaving me weaker. My body a shadow of itself. But my heart was still fighting. Tethered to Ethan. To the hope that he was finding his way back. His time at the shelter. His defiance of Victor, these were signs. Small but real. That the letter had reached him. But signs weren't enough. I needed to see him. To hear him. To know if the boy I'd raised was still there. Or if I'd lost him to the man he'd become. Carl's call came at dawn. His voice rough but steady. Ethan's still at the shelter. He said. He's been there all night. Helping with the morning shift. Victor's circling. Though. Saw his car outside the shelter last night. Just watching. I've got a friend keeping an eye out. But Ethan needs to be careful. Fear gripped me. Cold and sharp. Victor wasn't just a threat to Ethan's plans. He was a threat to his life. I thanked Carl and told him to stay close. To call the police if Victor got too near. I couldn't protect Ethan from the hospital bed. But I could make sure he wasn't alone. Maria called next. Her voice softer than usual. He's opening up, she said. Talked to one of the women today. A young mother named Lila. She told him her story, how she escaped an abusive husband. How the shelter saved her and her daughter. Ethan listened. Really listened. Asked her what she needed. How he could help. I've never seen him like that. Ellen. My throat tightened. Tears burning behind my eyes. Ethan listening. Helping. Karanjit was what I'd hoped for when I wrote the letter. When I gave the money to the shelter. But it was also a reminder of how far he'd fallen. How much he had to climb to get back to me. Did he mention me? I asked. My voice barely steady. Not directly. Maria said. But he asked if you'd ever talked about him. About what you wanted for him. I told him you wanted him to be a good man. To make a difference. He didn't say anything. Just nodded and went back to work. I thanked her. My heart heavy with a mix of pride and pain. Ethan was trying. But he was still holding back. Still keeping me at a distance. I needed him to come to me. To face me. to say the words that would bridge the gap between us. That afternoon, Sarah called with news that stopped my breath. "He's coming to see you," she said. "Called me this morning. Said he's ready to talk." I told him you're not strong. But he insisted. "He's on his way now." My heart raced. A mix of fear and hope so tangled I couldn't tell them apart. Ethan was coming. After everything, the betrayal, the letter, the shelter, was coming to face me. I didn't know what he'd say, what he'd want. But I knew this was it. The moment I'd been waiting for. I told Sarah to let him in. No questions. No delays. I needed to see my son. The hours until his arrival were torture, each minute stretching into eternity. I tried to prepare, to find the words that would meet his. But my mind was a fog of chemo and emotion. When I heard his footsteps in the hallway, hesitant but steady, I sat up straighter, ignoring the pain that shot through me. He stepped into the room, his face pale, his eyes red but clear. He held the letter in one hand, worn and creased, like he'd read it 100 times. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking on the word. I nodded, unable to speak, and gestured to the chair. He sat, his hands trembling, the letter a fragile bridge between us. "I read it," he said, holding up the paper. "All of it. Over and over. I didn't get it at first. Why you gave everything away. I was so angry. Mom. I thought you'd taken it from me. From us." He stopped, his throat working. "But then I went to the shelter. Saw what they do. Who they help. I met Lila. Heard her story. It's like you were trying to show me something. Something I forgot." I watched him, my heart pounding. "What did I show you?" I asked, my voice soft but steady. He looked down, tears spilling. "That it's not about the money," he said. "It's about what you do with it. Who you help." I forgot that. I forgot you. His voice broke, and he looked up, his eyes meeting mine. "I'm sorry, Mom. For everything, the lies. The papers. Victor. I thought I was helping, but I was just lost." The word hung between us, heavy and true. Lost. He'd been lost. But now he was here, sitting across from me, asking for forgiveness. I wanted to reach for him, to pull him close like I had when he was small. But I held back. "Sorry isn't enough," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "You hurt me, Ethan. You broke us. But you're here now, and that matters. What do you do next?" He nodded, wiping his eyes. "I'm done with Victor," he said. I told him I'm out. No matter what he does. I'm staying at the shelter, helping out. I want to make it right. Mom, I want to be the man you raised. It wasn't everything, but it was enough for now. I reached out, my hand trembling, and he took it, his grip warm and strong. "Then be that man," I said. "For them. For you. For me." He nodded, tears falling. And for the first time in months, I felt him his son, not the stranger he'd become. The road ahead was long, but he was on it. And so was I. The hospital room was quieter now, as if the world had paused to let Ethan and me rebuild what we'd lost. His hand in mine was a lifeline, warm and real, a reminder of the boy who'd once clung to me through storms. The letter, crumpled on his lap, was no longer just words, it was a bridge. Fragile, but holding. He'd apologized. Promised to change. But promises were easy. Living them was harder. And I knew the road ahead would test us both. The cancer was relentless, stealing my time. But I'd won this moment. This chance to see my son start to become the man I'd always believed he could be. I'm staying at the shelter, Ethan said, his voice steadier now. Maria offered me a cot until I figure things out. I'm done with Victor. Done with all of it. I want to help. Mom. Really help. I searched his eyes, looking for the lie. But all I saw was sincerity, raw and unpolished. Helping isn't enough, I said, my voice soft but firm. You have to mean it. Ethan. Every day? Not just for me. Not just for the shelter. But for you. He nodded, his jaw tight. I know, he said. I'm trying. I will. I leaned back, exhaustion pulling at me. The chemo had left me hollow. But the Ethan's words, his presence filled something deeper. I thought about the shelter, about the women and children who'd find safety because of what I'd done. I thought about my mother, her strength, her survival, and how I'd honored her with that choice. And now, Ethan was part of it. Not as a thief, but as a helper. A man choosing to do good. It wasn't redemption. Not yet. But it was a start. Carl called later, his voice lighter than I'd ever heard it. Victor's gone quiet, he said. Word is, he's moved on to another mark. Ethan's been at the shelter all day, working with the kids. Looks like he's sticking to it. I thanked him, my heart lifting. Victor's retreat was a victory. Small but real. Ethan wasn't out of danger. Not completely. But he was safer than he'd been. Surrounded by people who'd watch out for him. Who'd show him what it meant to give without taking. Maria called next. Her voice warm with pride. He's a natural. Ellen, she said. The kids love him. He's been teaching them how to fix things, bikes, toys, anything broken. He's patient, kind. I didn't expect that from him. I smiled, tears stinging my eyes. He's got it in him, I said. He just forgot for a while. Maria laughed softly. Well, he's remembering now. He asked about you again. Wanted to know if you're proud of him. I told him you always were. Even when it hurt. Proud. The words settled in my chest. Heavy and true. I was proud of Ethan. Not just for what he was doing now, but for the courage it took to face his mistakes. To choose a different path. I'd raised him to be strong. To be kind. And even if he'd lost his way, he was finding it again. That was enough. For now. I told Maria to keep him close. To let him know I was watching. That I believed in him. She promised she would. The days that followed were softer. The hospital less oppressive. Ethan visited again, bringing stories of the shelter. Of the kids he was helping. The women he was listening to. He didn't talk about the money. Didn't ask about the trust. Instead, he talked about Lila, the young mother who'd reminded him of his grandmother. About how she'd thanked him for fixing her daughter's bike. He talked about Maria. About how she'd shown him the shelter's budget. How every dollar from the trust was making a difference. His eyes were brighter. His shoulders straighter. Like he was shedding the weight of his guilt one act at a time. I listened. My heart full. But I didn't let him off easy. This is just the start. I told him one afternoon, my voice weak but clear. You've got a long way to go, Ethan, but you're on the right road. He nodded, his hand squeezing mine. I know, Mom. I'm not stopping. It wasn't a promise I could hold him to. Not yet. But it was enough to keep me going. To keep me fighting through the pain. The fatigue. The knowledge that my time was running out. The last time he visited, he brought a drawing from one of the shelter's kids, a crayon sketch of a house. Bright and lopsided, with a smiling sun overhead. She said it's for you, he said, his voice soft. Said you gave her a home, so she wanted to give you one. I took the drawing, my hands trembling, and traced the uneven lines. It wasn't just a house. It was everything I'd fought for, everything I'd given up. I looked at Ethan, saw the boy I'd raised in the man before me, and smiled. You gave her this, I said. You're part of it now. He stayed longer that day, sitting by my side, talking about the future, not money or houses, but the people he wanted to help, the man he wanted to be. When he left, he hugged me, his arms strong and warm, and I felt the tether between us, frayed but unbroken. The cancer was still there, stealing my breath, my time, but it couldn't take this. I'd fought for Ethan, for us, and I'd won, not with money or vengeance, but with love, with faith, with a letter that had brought him back to me. As the hospital lights dimmed, I held the drawing close, its colors bright against the sterile white. I didn't know how many days I had left, but I knew this: Ethan was finding his way, and I'd given him the map. That was enough. That was everything.